What we've got today is agricultural rev and French rev. Again, with the agricultural rev and industrial rev, they had some questions on like life during the industrial rev last year, but they didn't really have any about the agricultural rev. So special star next to this timeline because I think it's prime, especially the whole proletariatization process. All right, this timeline is really easy. It's not really so much a timeline, right? 1600, 1700, 1800. And this is timeline number 7, the agricultural rev. First, though, let's do the clusters. The clusters for this one are easy as they are for all. What's the main cluster that we're going to do? We are going to change the status quo or destroy the feudal society. I will say that for a lot of these, we're writing feudal society is going away, and we're moving towards. In the Enlightenment, what were we moving towards? Reason, but the feudal society was headed towards kind of democracy, right? In science, we were heading from the religion feudal society into reason in the scientific method. Here, we're moving from the old feudal society into more of an urban and a market. So kind of truly society and economics are changing. But those are our clusters. I don't think we need to go into too much more detail than anything else. So all this timeline really is I'm going to make 4 boxes, 1, 2, 3, 4, and we're going to fill in some facts about this change that's going on. There's not really a lot of specific dates or eras really to know. All right. So the first one, let's put it. If you split it, boom, right down the middle into 4 quadrants, then you're good. The first one, let's look at the top left, and let's title this one Old Agriculture / Feudal. So it's old. And what is old agricultural like? How would we describe it? This is really a human geo term. Subsistence. Very good. Subsistence agriculture means what? Farming for yourself, for family, for food. You're not creating a significant amount of blank to sell. Surplus, okay? You're not creating a lot of surplus. You're really just surviving on your own. And the reason they do that is not by choice. It's because we don't have the techniques, the practices, or really the fertility in the land to actually do it. What type of subsistence agriculture are we going to do? Where are we going to move? One of the first agricultural developments that really changes this is going to be something called the 3-crop rotation. 3-crop rotation is where instead of planting just one plant every year in the exact same place, you rotate. You do plant A, you do plant B, and then you leave the third field what? Fallow. Okay, fallow or empty. That's you just let some clover and other stuff grow and then die. Okay. Just like next year, I will not plant my vining beans in the same place. I will switch them in the cucumbers, and I will switch the tomatoes and the peppers. Where you get so angry. I don't know how gardens make you angry. Your little happy seeds just sprouting up. Okay. Now, what does life revolve around there? It's the feudal village. And it kind of surprised me that this was a key concept at first, but they really want you to see how the community changes from one era to the next. All right. Most land around a feudal village was what? It was farmland or ranch land, and we can be more specific though. It was communal. Everybody owned it. Okay. And why does that work? Because it truly takes a village of peasants to work enough land to make enough food to feed themselves. If even more than 10% of the people in a feudal, urban, or medieval city don't farm, more than 10%, then they probably won't produce enough crops that year to survive the winter. All right. Now, what's at the center of these feudal villages? There's a church. What else is there?
Noble house.
Yeah, the noble house, the castle, the government building. And that is truly a symbol of how society actually works. There is a rule by the clergy and by the priests. Now, there's 2 things. Well, there's one other big thing that really changes. One thing that helps change this, besides new agricultural techniques, which is coming. Come on in. Timeline's on the floor. Grab it. Sit down. You're just gonna block the doorway, or just stand there. Good. What's going on in the background of the 16, 1700s, 1800s? That's really good, especially 16, 1700s. We have absolutism going on in the background. That's probably not going to do much. We have the Enlightenment coming up. That's probably not going to do much. The Scientific Revolution, maybe that'll improve some techniques for farming, but that's not going to do much. Exploration. Okay. Now, one of the big players early on in exploration was Spain. Where does Spain explore heavily? Latin America, Central and South America. Okay. When they're over there, they actually go to Bolivia. What do they find in Bolivia that changes everything? Look at the first song in Pocahontas.
Corn.
Potatoes.
There's not a corn song in Pocahontas. There's not a potato song in get some culture. Get some culture. There's gold. They find gold. And what happens when they find gold? They bring it all back. And if I suddenly brought in $1 billion, or let's say $1 trillion into this room and just threw it into the economy, what happens? It sounds wonderful, but really it collapses. Okay, it's called the price revolution. It's basically an era of hyperinflation. Remember talking about this in Germany after World War I? The dollars in my pocket are worth something because every dollar I have is, let's say, 1/10 trillionth of all the dollars in the world. So that dollar can buy me an extra large Snickers bar. Okay? But if we suddenly added 10 billion more dollars to this economy because we literally discovered a bunch hiding underground, my money is now worth half. Okay? Is that good or bad? Bad. Okay? It's good because if we have twice as many people, we really physically need more money to actually use. You don't want the dollar to be worth too much, right? You don't want to be able to buy a car with $1. It becomes really problematic. But you want to be able to. You want your money to still have some power. So it's because of gold and silver. Okay. This is really, by the way, kind of the first wide global recession or global depression. So anyway, it's from exploration, gold and silver. This price revolution, where people's dollars become worth less, really, really, really hurts who? The peasants, because they don't have any money, right? If you only have $3, those being worth half as much really hurts you. If you have $1 billion, that being worth half as much, you've lost more money, but you're not hurting nearly as bad. Well, as the peasants lose a whole lot of money, what the nobles realize is that with this new three-crop rotation, with some new farming practices coming out of, what region? Do you know it begins a lot of these? What region is ahead of the rest? Not Norway. The Netherlands, right? The Netherlands, the little brother of England. The nobles realize that farming just might become profitable. So let's go over to era 2 here. This is enclosure and the actual agricultural ref. And if farming becomes profitable, what do we change it to? From subsistence? Commercial agriculture. And do you remember talking about that? If you can make money doing something, how does it change? No. Rich people buy it up, right? And that's where we get enclosure. This is the most important progression in this chapter. Commercialization of agriculture becomes profitable, so we end up with enclosure, or farms being bought by the rich. Okay? We literally talk about that big communal farm around the feudal village is now having fences built up, and the rich are buying them. The peasants are now, they lose their land, so what do they start to do? Don't get this wrong, you're going to screw it up. The peasants get their land bought by the nobles, so what do? You still work in farming, but you work for the nobles, right? So peasants work for, and I want to say this, in the old feudal system, when peasants grew crops, what did he do with that crop? He ate it, or if he had a surplus, eventually he sold it. That's how he made money. Here, how do families make money? Wages. This is, I would write it if you have room, this is the proletarianization. Actually, this is industrious revolution, not proletarianization, but they're all mean the same. So, how do households change in the old feudal village? there was actually a little bit more of a division of labor, right? The men and the children went out and worked, right? If you have communal farming, all the men in the feudal village go out and work. All the women stay home and generally take care of the household. Now, though, we can't just have the men go out and work because we need to earn a higher wage. So men and women work together. Okay? Also, if you live in a village with a whole bunch of people, other people just like you, and all the men leave together and all the women stay home, when it comes to raising the children, how do you handle that? It takes a village, right? It takes a village to raise a. But if you now have both parents leaving and then both parents coming home and blah, 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 the family becomes much smaller. What do we call it? Nuclear. Write that term down. It's a College Board term. The nuclear family becomes bigger. All right, I gotta go faster. But what's the ultimate? This is actually proletarianization. Eventually, as farming becomes better, and we get higher yields, what do the rich do? They buy more land, but you can fire people. With better farming practices, you can get the same yield from 80 peasants working your land as you used to have for 100. So what do? You fire 20 of them. Then farming gets better, you fire 20 more. Then farming gets better, you fire 20 more, right? And now, what do the peasants do? Urbanization. Okay? What are the characteristics of urbanization? Just blurt them out. Come on. Overcrowding. Tenements would be good. You could write that down, but I'm going to use the key concepts. What else is the problem? Poverty. Not disease. You're right. We'll say sanitation. Keep this above the line if you can. There's one other one they use. Sorry, somebody said it. Crime. Overcrowding, poverty, crime, and sanitation.
Isn't prostitution one?
We'll get to that. Okay. Now, here's the deal. All of this is a challenge to the old feudal life. These feudal people, the clergy and the nobles, really have power because they ruled what? They ruled that little feudal village. Nobles have a much harder time ruling large urban areas than they did the feudal village. All right, now we're moving to the bottom right, number 3. Number 3 is what? What? Developing a European market economy. This one's really short. We're going to go faster. All right. What's the new market economy, right? What's going on in the 1700s? What's our big guy right about here? Free trade. Okay? We have, write this thing down. Free trade plus a market. Okay? What's going to happen? Equals negative wages. Okay? Free market, free trade and market economy is about making a profit. The biggest way to make a profit is to cut how much you spend to make your product. Wages go down. Okay? As wages go down, how's quality of life going to go? Down a lot. Okay? All right. There's 2 ways that the peasants adapt a little bit. We're not quite working in factories and cities. We haven't developed them yet in the 1700s. There's really one type of middle ground, and that's called, do you remember the putting out system? The other name, the more common name, is the cottage industry. What happened, if you remember, is a tradesman would bring a giant stack of like raw cotton or wool to a family. That family would sit there, and from Sunday to Saturday, they would do nothing but make thread. The guy would come back at the end of the week, and he would, for a little bit more money, would buy this thread back. He would go to the next house, and he'd do what? He'd give that thread to a family. What does that family do? They weave it in a cloth. Comes back at the end of the week, buys it for more. He then sells it to another family, and they make T-shirts. Okay, so. The final thing is what does a country need to operate a free market economy? Even though we're talking invisible hand, the government still needs to get involved in a little tiny way. And how does it really help for a government to get involved? The bank. What's the name of our bank? No, it's the Federal Reserve. Okay, the Federal Reserve. For the most part, government-run bank that regulates the economy. It makes sure things don't go too high and things don't go too low. The best way they moderate that is they control how much money, how cheap it is to borrow money, and what's the number one reason you'll borrow money eventually? Not college. Housing. They control the housing market. What country gets a bank really early on that helps them in this development process?
France.
England. England gets it early on. France doesn't get a bank until when? 1800s under Napoleon, right? So the Bank of England. All right, way behind. This. I'll upload this online, but I'm going to say everything here. So if you don't write it down, this is the biggest section. But that's because it's a lot of work. The biggest thing here is social changes. Okay. All right. So we are still continuing communal activities. Most of them still revolve around religion, okay? The College Board loves to use the term carnival, okay? Because they're kind of still old pagan, but they mix in some religion, right? You should have the spring carnival, the summer solstice, all this other junk. A lot of Saints' Day festivals where people would go together. A lot of church authorities love these because they still enforce communal norms. We talked about this in that the weird chapter 18 that you taught yourself, right? Public humiliation was still pretty big. If you're caught breaking the law or you're caught sinning, you could be whipped in public. Are you okay?
I'm fine.
Okay. Here's maybe the biggest point for the whole thing. Before 1700. Life sucked for a lot of reasons. A big reason one, without good agriculture, not only did you not make money, what were you also really susceptible to? Disease, because you were tired and weak. If it was a really, really cold winter, what might happen? A lot of people die. If you have a dry summer, what will happen? Don't create food, a lot of people die. More importantly, who's the number one person of society to die? Kids. Okay, so the infant mortality rate is really, really, really high. Why is it good to have a lot of people die?
Then you have more.
Keeps the population.
More space keeps the population low, right? If half the teachers in the world died tonight, when I come in tomorrow, what am I going to do?
Make a lot of money.
I'm going to go, Mr. Spencer said, you're going to pay me twice as much. My quality of life will go up, okay? But after 1700, with more food, we have healthier people. We have less disease. The Black Plague really doesn't come back. Before 1700, we had big instances of the Black Plague, but now we have more food equals more babies. More importantly, more babies that live. Okay. So what happens if twice as many teachers show up tonight?
You get paid half as much.
I'm going to get paid half as much. Okay. Child mortality rate, guys, you really need to read this, okay? Child mortality rate drops. Family focus more on child rearing, right? More money, better quality of life. They have better houses. They have more stuff to do in their free time. They have cotton clothes. They have different types of entertainment like taverns and theaters. They even go so far as to say people now have porcelain dishes. Porcelain dishes is a key concept. Please go through this timeline. I'll upload it online and write those down in that space. We just don't have time right now. Erase what you got or flip it over and we go on to the French Rev. Erase.
Yeah, I'll
I was watching it like it was. I got my 90 bucks. Let me take this.
For this timeline, let's put 1800 a little bit from the end because we need to talk post. Start with 1600. Don't put 1700 in the middle. I put 1700 right about here because most of what we talk about is going to happen in this century, so we want to have the space. This is French Revolution. This is timeline number 8. The clusters are easy. This is perhaps the biggest cluster of all time for destroying the old feudal system, because it is quite literally trying to destroy the feudal system in France. But they don't call it the feudal system. What do they call it? The estates. Very good. Okay. Here we are moving from the feudal system, mostly political, to democracy. Therefore, it is most like what other time period?
American Rev.
Put a star next to Enlightenment. All right. If you ever get a question about the French Rev or Napoleon Bonaparte, you will talk about the Enlightenment. The ideals of the Enlightenment, the process of enlightenment, the importance of the Enlightenment. Okay? So number one, we need to look at the causes of the French Rev. And these are going to be all the way over the left. Write these real small because you see these three eras are going to take up most of the top. Okay? So we want to put this as far left as possible. The biggest cause of the French Rev is the three estates. You can really just draw the pyramid if you want to, right? The first estate is what? Clergy or the church. Second estate, the nobles. The third estate is everyone else. And what does the most to destroy the old feudal estate? What era? What year? Do you remember? It's exploration. Okay? Can you tell me, though, how does exploration destroy this? There's one term we've written a couple times. It's a key concept. It's a main thing. Egan? Because of the trade, because of the new economy of exploration, we end up with that French term nueva elite, or new elites. Guys, what were the new elites? What job? For the 50th times, bankers. Mostly bankers and merchants. But in France, they get a special term. Because if you're in everybody else and you get a lot of money, what do you try to do? Call up the king and say, hey, I want to be a noble. In other countries, being a noble is just nice. It comes with some titles, some land, stuff like that. But in France, it literally comes with voting rights and power. So, how do you actually get to become a noble? You call up the king and you say, hey, I want to be a noble. And how does the king make you a noble? He gives you a job. You pay him a lot of money and he gives you a job, like a judge or an army officer or something like that. Therefore, you get the term noble of the road. They are the new elite. Are these people liberal or conservative? They're very liberal because they say, listen, we understand the system is corrupt. We're actually fine with changing it a little bit. The old people, the people who got nobility long ago from the feudal system and fought in wars and all that other junk, they're called the nobles of the sword. They're not a key concept, but they are the opposites of the nobles of the robe. And our final reason for it, we'll put in the middle of 1700s, and there's a couple different reasons, but do you know there's two big causes that were kind of the 1760s to 1780s cause of the French Revolution. What were they?
Food.
We'll get to that. It's number two. Not bread. Yeah. Specifically, what's the problem with war? If you don't win, it costs a lot of money. Financial crisis. Okay? Financial crisis. Remember we talked about Louis XIV deficit spending, but good deficit spending, right? Spent a lot of money, but it was an investment, earned it all back. After Louis XIV dies, France slowly goes downhill under Louis XV. And then Louis XVI, it goes downhill. Even though he tries to fix it, it's too little too late. The best sign that they're in a real financial crisis is France fights the 7 Years' War. 7 Years' War is really the largest war in European history at the time, and France loses. You can't fight the biggest war in European history and lose. It turns into a pretty big problem. The other reason we already mentioned is in the very late 1780s, we had bad crop yields. We had bad crop yields. Okay? So, there's three phases for the French Rev. And by the way, the number one people who revolt in a community are who? No, not peasants. Urban workers. They're the peasants' comparisons in urban. And the number one reason the riots start is because of food riots. Okay, there's three phases. So if you can split these into three areas, you're good. They're not going to line up perfectly. The first phase is the liberal phase. This one, you actually know the exact date that it starts. What's the exact date that it starts? It's Bastille. July 14th, 1789. Very good. Now, this is the liberal phase. Their goal. What's their goal? Yes, they want to create a constitutional monarchy. They want to have a king, but they want to have a king restricted by law. All right? Right, constitutional monarchy. Okay? In this constitutional monarchy, individuals, though, still need to have rights. They agree with John Locke's idea that the government and the king's job is to protect the individual rights of the people. Therefore, the first document, you remember the National Assembly stormed out, they signed the Tennis Court Oath, they meet all summer. The first document they produced is called what? Declaration of the Rights of Man. Declaration of the Rights of Man. Very similar to the Declaration of Independence. It actually outlines the Declaration of the Rights. It actually outlines the rights that they are going to protect. We read that in class. It's one of the most enlightened documents in history. Next thing. They tried to destroy this old estate system. So So number one, they get rid of the Estates General, right? They stop the meeting where the clergy and the nobles really get power, and that hurts the nobles. Then they go after the clergy. They sign something called the Civil Constitution. Full title is the Civil Constitution of the Clergy. And it basically strips the political rights. It strips many of the political rights of the clergy. So eliminating that. Ultimately, though, when they finally produce their government, it's called the Constitution of 1791. We don't have to know all the Constitution of the French rep, by the way. Okay? The biggest point for the Constitution of 1791 is that the King of France is going to still rule. But he's going to rule with the checks and balance of who? Not Congress. National Assembly. Okay? Again, there's a whole lot more to this, but these are the key concepts. And that France should have stayed right here. If France stayed right here, it would be very, very similar to who? America. Okay, America. America started out much of its revolutionary chatter by wanting a constitutional monarchy, right? We didn't say no king. We didn't even say no taxation. We said no taxation without representation. We wanted a seat in their parliament, in their National Assembly. When they wouldn't give it to us, we said, screw it, we'll create our own country. But it doesn't stay there. We go to the second phase. What's the name of the second phase?
Conservative.
No. Radical phase. Radical phase. This is not enough. If you remember also, they caught the king running away. And this new constitution, this new National Assembly didn't do everything. The new radical phase is ushered in with what moment? You know? It's the beheading of Louis VI. So they beheaded the king. They chopped his head off in January 21st, 1793. Which, again, is perhaps the most radical moment in European history. They just cut the head off a king. It's not just any king. Who is it?
Louis XVI.
Divine right.
It's a divine right king. God selected this man to rule, and we chopped his head off. England's, oh my God, they're going to hell forever, right? So they behead the ruler, and most of the radical phase can be put under one man, Robespierre. Okay. What's his big group? He's a part of the Committee of Public Safety. Right. That's a key concept term. What does the Committee of Public Safety do? What's its big era? Reign of Terror. And there's two other points to make. One of their main targets, and this was a DBQ a long time ago. Of everything they could have picked in all of European history, there's one DBQ on this line. Nolan? They go further than the civil constitution. They don't just say we want clergy with no power. We want no clergy. It's called de-Christianization. De-Christianization. The best sign of this is that they literally change the calendar. They changed the calendar to I forget the name of it, but it actually makes more sense. It's a calendar with 10 months, and there's 10 days in each week, and boom, it looks nice and perfect. Okay. Anyway, they have de-Christianization. The last two people that are in the key concepts are two helpful revolutionaries that even Robespierre himself turns on. Number one, it is his second in command, his best friend. It was Danton. He's the guy who says, it's good that you're cutting my head off. Make sure to show it to the crowd because it's very worth looking at. And he actually is really ugly. Right? Yeah, okay. The other guy was the writer. He was kind of the words behind Robespierre Passionist Seats. He was the guy who died in the bathtub because he had the skin condition. Rot. Okay? Robespierre in the end killed him. The best political cartoon of the French Revolution, if you can remember picturing it. It's Robespierre. He's got a sea of guillotines behind him. Over his shoulder, there's a big pyramid gravestone that says, "Here lies France." And Robespierre is standing. He's standing on the two constitutions. That's his footing. And he's about to pull the rope on the guillotine. And the title underneath says there's a body on the guillotine. He's about to pull the rope. Robespierre is killing the executioner because he's killed everybody else in Paris. Okay? But in the end, we move away from the radical phase of the French Revolution. Why don't we stay in the radical phase forever? Because it's radical, nobody likes it, it's dangerous. So we move on to 3. And what's the third phase? Napoleon. My favoriteest man in history. At the end of Robespierre, at the end of the Committee of Public Safety, at the end of the Reign of Terror, we end up with confusion. We end up with several types of government in a very, very, very short amount of time. In the end, they settle on something called the consulate. Okay? In the consulate, though, it's very, very weak. So, what's a good way to make your government seem a lot more powerful? Get a celebrity to come and endorse and maybe even be in your government. In France at this time, there is only one guy, and that's Napoleon. He's in the general. Why are generals worshipped at this time? Because, lest you forget, under this whole era, France is fighting wars all over Europe. And the only general that really seems to be holding his own is Napoleon. He is actually invited to be consul. Okay? But he realizes the consulate is weak and he has a lot of power, so what does he do over time? He decides he wants to have more power. Do you remember how he takes power, though? This is the genius of Napoleon. Takes it democratically through plebiscite ballots, right? Big piece of paper that says, do you want Napoleon to be your emperor? Check yes, check no. Everybody checks yes. So he becomes emperor. In fact, he's even crowned emperor. What's symbolic as the moment he crowned emperor? He crowns himself. He does not allow the clergy to crown himself. He's not saying God selected me to be your leader. He's saying I selected me to be your leader. I earned it. Okay. He also has. Do you remember I told you he builds a good word over here? I didn't put it on my thing, but he builds something called a meritocracy. This is maybe, and I know I say this a lot. This is maybe the biggest attack on the feudal system of all. Instead of a feudal system based on birthplace, right, or family, or job, it is based on merit. And Napoleon believes that because even though he was a noble, remember he was born in Corsica, he was a lower noble. So he really had to fight his way. He had to earn his position as general. He couldn't buy it. And he believed that everybody should earn their position, which builds for a much better society. Now, a big part of, if you have a general for an emperor, military conquest is a really, really, really big part of your government. So what he does is as he conquers these areas, do the people generally like him at first or hate him at first? Like him. Because he is spreading these liberal ideas. It's called liberal revolutionary ideas. Liberal revolutionary ideas, right? But eventually people don't like being ruled by a foreigner. So we see for the first time in the early 1800s, the people of different areas, they responded. How do they respond? We're going to use a word that very soon is going to define European history from the middle 1800s and on. Nationalistic response. Nationalistic response. The best example of an area of this is obviously Germany, which isn't a country yet, but they say to themselves, we as Germans, why are we allowing ourselves to be ruled by a French guy? All right, the good of Napoleon. Oh, that's a front page. The good of Napoleon, okay? He does a couple things. Number one, if you have a meritocracy, how do you find the best people in your society?
They work for it.
How do you find the best people in your society? The best people at military, the best people at government. How do you pick those people out? Education. Education. How do they, here's the big one. How do you make sure the nobles don't take advantage of their position? You create something called the Napoleonic Code, or it's called the Civil Code. What is the Civil Code, guys? Yes?
Standardized set of laws throughout all the French Empire.
Yes, that everybody has to follow. If you break these rules, you will have these penalties. Whether you're a priest, a noble, or a commoner. That sets the power of the nobles and the clergy back a lot. He also centralizes power. And he peace with the church. If you remember, he creates something called the Concordat of Bologna. Concordat of Bologna, 1801. And what he does is, clergy, you can come back to France, but I will appoint you to your position. Why is that a genius move? The clergy comes back to France, and
they're controlled by the king.
They're controlled by the emperor, by Napoleon. If I give you your job, that means I can do what? Take it away. You better be nice to me. What is bad reform?
Oh, the censorship.
Censorship. If you want to be a very powerful leader, or a very powerful emperor, or a very powerful dictator, how do you make sure you have control? We see it with the Soviet Union. We see it with Germany's secret police. Okay. So let's write our third point here. I think I've got about 3 minutes left. I'm sorry, we're a little longer than I thought, but we'll get there. Other things. Other things. Okay, number one, women. They are happy because women participate a lot more in the revolution. How do they participate? There's some writers. We talked about the Women's March to Versailles, where they go and grab the king and bring him back to Paris. And there's a lot of other things that the women take part in. But women will still not be seen as citizens throughout most of this process. Even though we're talking about republicanism, even though we're talking about democracy, women are not going to be offered voting rights. They're not going to be offered true equality. Okay? A big guy who is actually against them, not against them, but more towards traditional roles, I guess you could say, was our radical guy, Rousseau. He said no to women's rights. He said no to women's rights. It's not best for society. Hey, good girls. It's not what's best for society, right? There were a couple people who openly opposed Rousseau. So he's sad for women. What was the most famous one to openly oppose Rousseau? Olympe de Gouges. Or Olympe de Gouges. She wrote a document called the Declaration of the Rights of Women, where she outlines how women should be equal. There was an English counterpart, same person as Olympe de Gouges. Wollstonecraft. Her daughter would go on to?
Ray Frankenstein.
Ray Frankenstein, Mary Shelley. Wollstonecraft wrote Vindication of the Rights of Women, an even more impassioned push for women's rights. The last two things. The end of Napoleon, I can actually fold this into the next timeline pretty well. The end of Napoleon, even after he comes back and leaves, what defines the end of Napoleon?
Exile.
This should really be all the way over here in 1815. Congress of Vienna. The Congress of Vienna marks our next era. It's the rise of what political group? Conservatism. A better way to put it, a way that makes it fall in line with everything we've been talking about in all other timelines is what? Reactionary. We are re-feudalizing. We should have kings that pass down power through heredity, right? We should have nobles. We should have the clergy and the church have strong control because that's what makes life steady. This stuff is nice, but look what happens when you try to go to democracy, right? We kill kings, we have violence, we have crazy. Okay? They want to stop. Do you remember we talked about, oh crap, like the Holy Alliance and the Congress system? Remember the Congress system? I remember that. The Congress system is a group of conservative leaders that led by who? Clemens von Metternich. And they meet together, and anytime somebody says, hey, there's this peasant over here, he's talking about having an uprising and overthrowing the government. Then what happens? The whole Congress gathers together, they march over there, and they all slaughter that peasant together. Because a revolution in France would be bad to all the rest. Because a revolution in Russia or a revolution in Austria would be bad for all the other countries. Because there was this revolution in France, and what happened? Regular people all over Europe said, hey, we want power too. Why does the king have to have everything? Here's the big one. There's two more things to write down. The ultimate goal of the Congress of Vienna was to restore what in Europe? Balance of power. Napoleon screwed it up. We ended up in a war. Balance of power gets screwed up again under Otto von Bismarck. So we end up in 3 different wars. And the very last key concept, the one that's super duper 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 easy, but we don't talk about much, is the best example of these revolutionary ideas spreading outside of Europe is when they spread to a French colony. Write down Louverture.
That word.
Louverture was a revolutionary movement leader in what French colony? It's Saint Dominique / it will become Haiti. Okay? He's inspired by revolutionary ideas to give rights to the people and bring individual power, success, and kick out France. Okay, guys, first bell's gonna ring in a minute.